Okay, I have turned on the recording to allow us to record this financial aid night so that both schools can share it on their website or share it with parents who request to see it if they had to miss it tonight due to our technical issues or because of other commitments. Everybody should be seeing the presentation. Steve is our Director of Financial Aid. Earl and I are your Senior Associate Directors. My name is Meryl Schwab, and I'm here assisting Earl this evening. We're going to talk about financial aid while we give some families a couple moments more to sign on. And we will talk about what is financial aid, what sources of financial aid exist, and how to apply for financial aid.
Meryl, I think I'm in now.
Excellent.
Although I keep getting.
So Earl and I will be tag teaming, as I just said, and talking about paying for college. As many of you, I'm sure, are parents of seniors, doing the application process and starting the financial aid process as well. What you can base your financial aid on to determine need-based or merit-based aid. And so I'm going to turn this over to Earl and jump in intermittently.
Thank you, Meryl. Sorry for all the technical difficulties. So we're going to talk about the types of financial aid that are available to students and families. And basically there are two types. We break it down into the free money, which are the grants and scholarships, and the self-help money, the funds that students either earn through work-study positions or borrow through the federal student loan program. The sources of financial aid basically come, the largest source being the federal government. Then here in New York State, we're fortunate to have, probably next to California, the best state grant program in the country. So there are a lot of state grant funds as well. Colleges themselves set aside money out of their endowments and their budgets to award institutional aid to students. And then other sources we encourage students to look into are from businesses, foundations, clubs, organizations, and civic organizations. Cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is broken down into two components, the direct expenses and the indirect expenses. The direct expenses, those being the expenses you are billed for by the university. So for example, it would be the tuition and fees for a commuter student, and you would add room and board to that for a student who chooses to reside on campus. Indirect expenses are those miscellaneous expenses that you're going to incur as part of the college process. And that includes books and supplies, transportation, and personal expenses. So the billable expenses are what you are actually charged by the university or college, and the indirect expenses are the expenses that you would incur on your own. We all know that their students need to buy books. They want to go home occasionally, so we build in transportation costs. Personal expenses would be things like doing their laundry or going out for pizza on a Friday night, etc.
I do also want to invite anyone who does have questions throughout the presentation. Feel free to type them into the chat and we'll answer them either in writing or live as we go through the presentation, and we'll leave time at the end for Q&A as well.
Okay, so here you can see an example of our cost at the University at Albany. The tuition and fees for the 21-22 year would be $10,821. Our room and board, $15,037, and that's a standard room and meal plan. That's typically what our package incorporates. We approximate about $1,000, $500 per semester for books and educational supplies, and then transportation, $400 for the year, personal expenses, $1,300. And the federal government assesses students a fee, an origination fee, which comes out of their loan proceeds before they even get the loan, and that's $70. Also on this screen, you can see for our out-of-state residents, they would need to add an additional $18,390 to the direct expenses. So the tips here would be always calculate the bottom line using the direct expenses. And just to be aware that oftentimes for our out-of-state students, there is a tuition differential. And at all times, costs are estimated. Unfortunately, a lot of colleges don't know what their actual tuition and fees will be. For example, here at SUNY, our costs aren't often finalized till the SUNY Board of Trustees meets in June and sets the tuition and fees for each of the campuses. Some of the privates probably have a little bit of a heads up on that because they're out there a little bit earlier with their boards making those decisions, and they have probably more of a correct cost of attendance at the time they go out with their financial aid packages. How to apply for financial aid. The national form that you're going to do is the free application for federal student aid, what we fondly call the FAFSA. And we just want to caution you that make sure you are doing the free application for federal aid and to use the resources available to you. There are lots of financial aid administrators out there doing financial aid nights. SUNY has a SUNY Financial Aid Day that the counselors will be getting more information on to you as well. Just be a good consumer, as there are consultants out there that will charge you a substantial fee to process the free application for federal student aid. So we're going to talk about the FAFSA, and then we're also going to talk about how you apply for state funds through the New York State Payment Application and the Excelsior Scholarship as well. And then further on, we'll talk about some of the other forms that may be required. Okay, to sign the FAFSA, the student will be signing electronically, and they do that by means of their FSA ID or their Federal Student Aid ID. So the way the student would create that ID is to go to the federalstudentaid.gov site, and there they will find a link to create their FSA ID. A parent also has to have an FSA ID, so they would do the same thing. Go to the studentaid.gov site, create that FSA ID, and that's how they're going to sign electronically. If the parent has an FSA ID that they've used recently for a sibling going to school, they do not need to create another FSA ID for the new student. They can use the one that they've been using all along. Or if the parent was in school themselves, they may have an FSA ID that's usable as the parent's signature also. Both the parent and a student have to have the FSA ID to sign the FAFSA. How to apply for financial aid. Okay, you can see it says there for 22-23 coming soon. Actually, we've used this presentation prior to October 1. So as of October 1, the new form became available, and that is found at studentaid.gov. When you go there and you link to the FAFSA, you're going to see the 21-22 FAFSA out there as well. You want to make sure that you're doing the 22-23 application. That's the one for high school students graduating this June. They're going to complete 22-23. The online application is a lot quicker than trying to do it by paper. You can download a paper PDF, but it's much more difficult to do. The nice thing about the online application too is it has skip logic, so it's only going to ask questions that are pertinent to the student's answers. So you're going to want to do the online FAFSA at studentaid.gov. Some schools set priority filing deadlines. Here at UAlbany, we have December 1st as our priority deadline for new students, and then January 1st for our continuing students. The reason why we do that is some of the funding is limited. There are a number of programs called campus-based programs, such as Work Study and the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, where each campus is only allocated a certain amount of funding by the federal government. And once that funding is gone, it's gone. So the students who meet the priority deadlines are often the ones that will receive additional funding from those sources. Okay, the FAFSA eligibility requirements. First and foremost, students must be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. Dependency status. This gets a little bit tricky. There's about, I would say, probably 8 to 10 questions on the FAFSA that determine a student's dependency status. And depending on how they respond to those questions, it will either default to the student requiring to provide parent information, or it will skip to them meeting criteria to be an independent student and solely report their information. For our purposes here tonight, I'm going to assume that most of the students are traditional students and will be dependent students. So that means that they will be filing on the FAFSA, providing their financial information as well as parent financial information until they are 24 years old. They are considered to be dependent. There are extenuating circumstances or special circumstances sometime that will allow a student to file as an independent student. If you think you may qualify for any of those, we suggest you contact the financial aid office. For example, if a student has no contact with either parent, they've been abandoned, etc., that may warrant a dependency override, which has to be conducted by the financial aid officer at the school you're applying to. Parent information. Dependent students provide parent information, and the parent information includes the parent's marital status, name, date of birth, social security number, state of residence, household size, and number of children attending college. Sometimes you can include other people in the household if the parent is providing more than 50% of that individual's cost. So for example, if there's an elderly grandparent who is part of the household and the parents are supporting that grandparent, they may be included as part of the household. Number of children attending college. Sometimes this gets a little confusing if there's a graduate student attending college. That graduate student technically has filed financial aid forms under their own information. By the mere fact that they are a graduate student, they're considered independent. But if they are residing in your household and you're providing more than half of their support, you can include them in the household size and number in college for the new student's financial aid form. Marital status: divorced or separated parents, not married. Only the custodial parent needs to report information. So I can't see the whole screen there. I know there's more. Meryl, can you jump maybe to, does it go to, it's not showing me the whole. Okay. Marital status continued. If the parents live together, married or unmarried, both report income, even if taxes are filed separately. So in some cases, parents may be separated or divorced, but residing in the same household. Unfortunately, in that case, the FAFSA requires the reporting of both incomes, even though there is a separation or divorce. If the custodial parent has remarried, for federal financial aid purposes, that step parent's information does get reported on the FAFSA form. Income questions. For the 22-23 academic year, the FAFSA requires the 2020 federal income tax return information. So there's a 2-year look back. The 2020 tax return has already been filed, so this enables applicants to report that data on the 22-23 FAFSA form. And we recommend that you consult with the financial aid office if there are special circumstances related to income. We're seeing a lot of situations where the 2020 income information that they're asking you to provide may not be a true picture of what's really going on in the household financially. So at that point, you would want to reach out to the financial aid office. For example, if someone has become unemployed and they were employed in 2020, that has a tremendous impact on the financial aid. And oftentimes schools are able to honor an appeal and make some adjustments in the student's financial aid package. Okay, how do you apply for financial aid? The easiest and most accurate way to complete the FAFSA is to use what is called the IRS data retrieval tool. So as I've mentioned, you've all completed your 2020 federal tax return. The data retrieval tool allows you to link over directly to the IRS and authenticate with them, giving them permission to populate your 2020 tax information into the FAFSA. Mostly everyone should be able to use the data retrieval tool. There are a few exceptions. If the parent has filed a separate return, or if taxes were filed using an ITIN. Both of those cases exclude you from the data retrieval tool process. But we highly recommend that you use the data retrieval tool. When you authenticate, you can see on the screen there, it's very, very particular. So you want to make sure that you're reporting the information as it is reflected on your 2020 tax return. So if street is written out on your tax return when you go to authenticate, you're going to want to write out street, not abbreviate. If there was an apartment number provided, make sure you put that apartment. It's very particular. It won't authenticate if it doesn't match item for item to the 2020 tax return. Let's talk a little bit about asset questions. Sometimes the FAFSA, using the skip logic, will enable you to exclude some asset information, but there are also basic asset information that you must provide. For example, they will ask cash savings and checking account amounts, investments in real estate. If you own a business that employs more than 100 employees, you must report the net value of that business. So let me jump back a little bit. As far as cash savings and checking accounts, you're going to want to report what you carry as an average balance, not a situation where you may have deposited your paycheck and that money is going right out the door. So what they're looking for is what you have as an average balance in cash savings and checking. Investments is pretty much everything unless you can hide it under a mattress. Real estate would be things like vacation homes or rental property. And again, you would only report a business if there are more than 100 employees in the business. Your primary residence is always excluded. Tax-deferred retirement accounts, life insurance annuities are excluded as well. Once you complete the financial information, usually you will get a review, and then you will link over to the confirmation page. On that confirmation page, you're going to want to link over and start your state application. There's a link that allows you to leave the FAFSA, link over to Higher Ed Services Corporation, and complete the New York State Payment Application. The confirmation page will also provide you with student aid estimates. It will show you if you qualify for a Pell Grant, what your approximate student loan eligibility will be. And it gives you an approximate estimated expected family contribution. The expected family contribution is not what you're really going to pay out of pocket. It's more of an index used by the financial aid office to calculate your eligibility for aid. The expected family contribution is calculated using a federal formula, and it's all based on answers you've provided and data provided to the Department of Ed through the FAFSA questions. The expected family contribution should be the same no matter what college you're looking at, whether it be Harvard or Hudson Valley Community College. That EFC for federal aid purposes will be the same from one college to another. Sources I can get from the FAFSA. Currently, for the 22-23 school year, students who qualify and show financial need for Pell can get up to $6,495 per year. There's that supplemental educational opportunity grant that I was talking about, and that's a supplement to the Pell Grant. So to be considered for supplemental SEOG, the student must be a Pell Grant recipient. And one of the other criteria the Department of Ed sets for that is that it be funneled to the campus's neediest students. So those parameters are set at the campus level. Also federally, we are allocated funds to employ students both on and off campus through federal work-study programs. Students can work in for-profits or not-for-profits and earn a paycheck. It's a good way for them to build their resume and get some job skills. Another federal program is the direct loan program. The loan program is broken into two components. There is a subsidized direct loan and an unsubsidized direct loan. Currently, the interest rate for both of those is fixed at 3.73. That changes every year when the T-bill changes, so it's been consistently pretty low for the past couple of years. We will have to see what happens in July, but that usually is the point at which the new rate is determined. The subsidized loan, student has to demonstrate financial need through the FAFSA. And the maximum a student can borrow as a freshman through the subsidized loan program is $3,500. They can borrow also an additional $2,000 as an unsubsidized loan for a combined amount of direct loans $5,500 their freshman year. If the student doesn't qualify for the subsidized loan, they had no financial need, the full $5,500 can be borrowed as an unsubsidized loan. Let me talk about what subsidized and unsubsidized means. A subsidized loan means that the student doesn't pay anything until 6 months after they graduate, leave school, or drop below half time. That loan is being subsidized by the federal government, and they, in essence, are paying the interest for the student while they are in school. The unsubsidized loan, the interest starts accruing right away because there is no financial need. The government is not subsidizing it, and the student is expected to pay the interest. What happens with the unsubsidized loan is the interest gets capitalized, so you're paying interest on top of interest. It's usually best if the student or family is able to do so to try and pay that interest as they go. And they would just have to reach out to the contracted lender through the government and possibly, if they can, while they're in school, pay that unsubsidized loan interest so they're not having it capitalized. The other loan program available to parents of dependent students is the parent loan. That's an undergraduate loan where for parents, they borrow on behalf of the student. The 21-22 rate is currently 6.28%. That does require a credit check. So if for some reason the parent applies and does not get approved through the credit check, the student then becomes eligible to borrow an additional $4,000 as an unsubsidized loan. Some tips: the direct subsidized and/or unsubsidized loans are in the student's name, so they're the borrower. They are required to complete the promissory note, which is basically the legal document they're signing and borrowing that money. And they also go through kind of a mini quiz that the government has set up for them called entrance counseling. And what that entrance counseling does, it forces the student to read information about borrowing, what the interest rates are, information on what happens in repayment, what happens if they become disabled. They have to complete both of those pieces, the entrance counseling and the promissory note, before that loan can be dispersed to their account. The PLUS loan is in the parent's name. So again, they would be responsible for repayment of that loan, and they would be the ones signing the promissory note. Additionally, if students need, as a last resort, additional funds, they can borrow under the Alternative Education Loan Program. They are the borrower, but because at this point in their life they may not have credit established, they will likely need a cosigner under the Alternative Loan Program. All of those loans, with the exception of the alternative loans, can be found at studentaid.gov. That's where you would find information, complete the promissory notes, and the entrance counseling. The private loans, if you just Google private education loans, you'll get a whole bunch of hits showing you what lenders offer private education loans. Unfortunately, we can't recommend lenders, one lender over another, so you have to be a good consumer. Just make sure you understand all the terms and conditions should the student opt into borrowing a private or alternative education loan.
Earl, on the previous slide, there was information about the 529 and assets. It specifically made reference to it depends who owns it for reporting purposes. Can you elaborate, please?
Sure, thank you. So for 529s, it would only get whoever has the taxpayer ID is the owner of the 529. So if a parent has a 529, then they are going to report that asset in their section of the FAFSA. If a grandparent owns the 529, then that asset would not get reported. What happens with the 529 with the grandparent example is when the student benefits from that grandparent using the 529, the following year, that would be considered on the student's FAFSA as untaxed income. That help?
I believe so.
Okay. How do I apply for New York State grants and scholarships? New York State requires students to complete the New York State Payment Application. Some of you may have had previous children go through college, and you may have done what was called the TAP application. That has now been replaced with the New York State Aid Payment Application. The reason for that is they've added a bunch of different New York State awards and scholarships, so all of them get funneled through this payment application now. It's not just TAP anymore. So you're going to complete your online HESC application using your HESC PIN. You have to authenticate and sign through motor vehicle. Most of the information on the higher education site form, the New York State Payment Application, will preload from information you've provided on the FAFSA. So you'll see a lot of that pre-populated. There are a few additional questions that you will have to complete, but that's at hesc.newyork.gov. If you missed the link from the confirmation page, you can still complete the New York State Payment Application. Typically, they ask that you wait 3 to 4 business days so that they, at Higher Ed Services Corporation, receive your FAFSA data, and then you will need to just go to hesc.newyork.gov, and you'll be able to link on Start My Application. Okay, what New York State grants and scholarships are available? Probably the most prominent one that families are familiar with is the Tuition Assistance Program, or TAP. It's for undergraduates only. It is need-based, and students currently can receive up to $5,665 a year. TAP is a full-time program. There is a similar part-time equivalent in New York State called Aid for Part-Time Study, but typically most of the students coming traditionally from high school do enroll full-time, which is considered 12 credits for the TAP program, and they have to be in degree applicable coursework. The New York State TAP amounts are based on New York State income information, as opposed to the federal programs, which look at adjusted gross. New York State is looking at your New York taxable, so that's typically after all your exemptions and deductions. That cutoff currently is a New York taxable income of $80,000. The New York State Excelsior program provides full in-state tuition coverage for students attending either SUNY or CUNY, the City University of New York. So it's not a private school thing like TAP, where students can receive funding through the tuition assistance program. Excelsior is specific to SUNY or CUNY. They have to be enrolled at a SUNY or CUNY. And also, the way Excelsior works, it is a tuition-only award, and it gets reduced by any other grants or scholarships not specifically earmarked for room, board, or fees. So in this example, the award Excelsior, we're showing you that it gets, the Pell and the TAP get deducted from the Pell and the TAP reduce your Excelsior scholarship. So in some cases, students who are fully funded with Pell and TAP would not qualify for Excelsior funding, even if your family met the income threshold of $125,000. The enhanced tuition awards are similar to Excelsior and are specific to private institutions. Private institutions had to opt in. So the best way to determine if the school you're applying to is participating in the Enhanced Tuition Award Program is to go to the hesc.newyork.gov site. There you'll find a list of participating schools. And that award does get reduced by TAP as well. Same income qualifications as Excelsior. The New York STEM program provides full in-state tuition scholarships, again, to CUNY and SUNY students. They must be pursuing a degree in science, technology, engineering, or math. And it's surprising what majors fall under those categories. So it's always a good idea to apply for STEM. It is merit-based. There's no income restrictions. Students have to be in the top 10% of their senior class to qualify for STEM incentive funding. And they can apply at hesc.newyork.gov anytime going forward. The New York State Achievement and Investment Scholarship, or AIMS as it's called, is a $500 scholarship. Students must meet two of the three criteria below. Graduate with a high school GPA of 3.3 or higher, graduate with honors on a Regents diploma or receive a score of 3 or higher on 2 or more advanced placement exams, or graduate within the top 15% of the class. So 2 out of those 3 things must be achieved in order to qualify for the New York State AIMS program. Okay, some of the New York State programs require service commitments. For example, the Excelsior Scholarship Program requires that the student earn 30 credits per academic year and graduate on time. So the intent is that the student working on a bachelor's degree would typically finish within 4 years. That means that if they get funding through Excelsior for 4 years, they are committing to staying in New York State for 4 years as part of the service contract under the Excelsior program or the ETA program. So they must live in New York State for 4 years if they get funded with Excelsior or ETA. And if they are employed, they must also be employed in New York State. If they only receive Excelsior or ETA for 1 year, then they would have to do that for 1 year. If they get it each of the 4 years, then there is a 4-year stint. If for some reason the student doesn't uphold the service contract under Excelsior it becomes a 0% loan. Let's say, for example, they did get Excelsior funding for 4 years, and then they land a fantastic job out on the West Coast. They're going to establish residency there. They would then be responsible for paying back those Excelsior or ETA funds, but it's 0% interest. So it's still a pretty good deal. To avoid that loan conversion, again, you must live and work, if employed in New York State, for the same period of time that you received funding. Okay.
For Excelsior income limits, does that follow the same one-parent income if divorced as FAFSA?
Okay, so the income limit for Excelsior is based on the family's adjusted gross income. Currently for 21-22, that is 125,000. So depending on how you're defining your family on the FAFSA, yes, it would be based on the family adjusted gross, whether that's the student and one parent, or if the parents are considered married, the parent and both parents. Okay, as far as institutional aid, many colleges give away institutional funds. Some of them are based on merit, and that's determined through the admissions application process. Others are need-based, so it may require that you provide the school with a separate application. The best way to determine if you have to complete institutional financial aid forms is to check the school's website or reach out to their financial aid office, specifically inquiring whether there's a separate financial aid application for need-based or merit-based awards. Other sources of aid that might be available, there are online scholarship searches. The three most reputable you can see up there: fastweb.com, collegeboard.org, scholarships.com. Be very careful. All of you can do online searches using the search engines. Many of them are very reputable. However, there are some situations where scams are occurring through scholarship searching. Just be careful if you get into a situation where they want a fee or they want credit card information. You're going to want to get out of that site. You shouldn't have to pay for financial aid searches. You can do it totally online. A lot of information can be found on school websites. You can also check the public library. We encourage students to check with their parents' employers or unions. Those are good sources of possible scholarship funds as well.
Basically, the important thing is don't pay for free money.
That's it. Other tips: start applying for private scholarships now. I know, for example, the FastWeb site collects demographic information. They want to know everything about the student and the family, what civic organizations they belong to, what extracurricular activities they do, and it continually searches the internet and will push out information to you for scholarships that you might qualify for. So you can start that process now. Review and update your list of colleges on the FAFSA and TAP applications. I don't think I mentioned you can provide up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. Should you have more than 10, you would have to wait until the first 10 process, then go back into the studentaid.gov site, log back into your FAFSA, and take some schools off, and then you can add additional schools. The TAP application, TAP is going to process your TAP eligibility or award based on the first New York State school that appears in your list on the FAFSA. So you should try and put your priority New York State school first on the FAFSA so that it gets processed for the school you hope to be attending. Should that not work out, you can always go on to the hesc.newyork.gov site and change the school code so that the TAP funds do get directed to the school you commit to. Another tip, make sure you respond in a timely manner to requests for information. A lot of times the financial aid office will have to collect other income information. They may have to do income verification required by the federal government. So respond to those requests quickly. Sometimes we're asked to confirm citizenship. Higher Ed Services Corporation may also ask you to confirm citizenship. So in order to avoid delays, you're going to want to make sure you respond to all of that in a timely manner. Financial aid office is the best place to get your questions answered. Go right to us. Don't get the word on the street from people who think, oh, I apply, I don't qualify for anything, you're not going to qualify for anything. That isn't always the case. You can't compare one student's financial aid or one parent's financial information to another. We want to always encourage you to apply every year. Some of the requirements change annually, and your financial situation may change annually. So you want to get your questions answered directly from the financial aid office. Yeah. Next slide. Okay, more tips. You always want to be cognizant of the bottom line. Again, you want to think about the direct cost when you're calculating the bottom line. What does this scholarship truly mean? When you are awarded scholarships, you're going to want to ask, is it renewable? Is it a one-time scholarship? What are the academic requirements? Is there a 3.5 GPA requirement? Do I have to accumulate a certain number of credits? Those are good questions that you're going to want to ask about your scholarships. What are my out-of-pocket expenses? Think back to that cost of attendance information. You know, you're going to want to try and figure out roughly what your book expenses are, what transportation expenses might be for you if you if you have a student attending a school on the West Coast, there's going to be probably flight information to get back and forth to home. You're going to have that expense. What colleges can I afford to attend? You don't want to rule a college out based on cost. You want to make sure you apply, pursue your dream, and get the financial aid information before you make your bottom decision. So what colleges can you afford? You're going to collect those award letters that are sent out to you and compare the bottom lines before making that decision. What are other colleges offering you? You can sometimes with private institutions, if you have your heart set on one, you can sometimes contact them and ask them to consider awarding you additional funds because you really want to go there, but it's just not quite enough based on their initial offer to you. And sometimes saying that other colleges have offered you more money may get you a little bit of leverage with a private institution. Use cost comparison tools. We have a great cost comparison tool on our website at UAlbany Financial Aid. It allows you to put in 3 or 4 different schools and it will calculate the bottom line for you. Net price calculators. The government requires every institution to have a net price calculator on their website. That will enable you to put your financial information in, and the net price calculator kind of estimates what type of financial aid you might receive from that institution, and what loans you might be expected to borrow from that particular institution. Good way to kind of get a sense of what your out-of-pocket is going to be at each individual college.
So to reiterate with the FAFSA, the FAFSA allows 10 schools. So you can put up to 10 schools on the FAFSA. If for some reason you're applying to 12, you might want to wait till at least 2 of those schools have the data, and then you can swap out 2 of the college codes. The reason we mentioned put the school at the top of the list in slot number 1 is the only slot that the New York State application pulls college from. It only allows 1 college on it. So it doesn't really matter what school you put there, but it's, if you have a first choice, especially if it's a SUNY, that might be the one to put in slot number 1. Otherwise, you're going to have to go into HASC and change the college code at a later time, which is not a problem, but that's why we were saying what order to put it in, so that they get the New York State aid information. So yes, if your first choice is not a SUNY, then, and you think that's where you're going to go if you get accepted, then you might want to put that in slot 1 just so New York State gets that information first, and then you can change it later on.
This is a slide of our cost comparison school chart, so that you can see there, you can list up to 3 colleges, and it's an interactive PDF that will calculate the bottom line for you. Nice tool that we have out there for our students and applicants. Okay, questions, some important contacts. The Federal Student Aid, or 800-4FED-AID, is their phone number, or studentaid.gov is a wealth of information. As I've mentioned, too, Higher Ed Services Corporation administers all of the state grant and scholarship programs. They can be reached at 888-697-4372 or at hesc.newyork.gov. One thing I do want to mention too, we talked about applications. I don't think I mentioned that the Excelsior is does require a separate application. So that application opening date is set by Higher Ed Services Corporation. We don't always know that when that will be. So you're going to want to watch for the Excelsior application and make sure that you complete that in a timely manner. There's typically a very short window of time that they accept Excelsior applications. What I would encourage you to do, if you go to hesc.newyork.gov and visit the Excelsior link, you can get on their mailing list and they will email you updates as far as Excelsior, and also notify you when the application opens up and what the deadline is. Any questions that came about through chat?
I'm answering one, but we can do it out loud. The question was, some more clarification on the first school spot. So on the FAFSA, you can put 10 schools. The New York State aid application, because it uses the FAFSA to default a skeletal piece of it, the piece of the application. So some of your biodem data and some of the school information, it's only pulling from slot 1. So whether a SUNY or a private school, if the student has ultimately a really first choice, that's where they really want to go. If they get admitted, then that might be the school you put in slot 1 so that it starts the New York State aid application with the school that they ultimately will plan to go to or hope to go to.
Yeah, I may have opened a can of worms with that. The school codes can be updated anytime. It's just for ease of application, we recommend the first New York State school. It's not real critical. And any financial aid office can walk you through changing so that the TAP award gets to the correct school. I apologize. I may have created more angst over that than was necessary.
Right, but if their first choice is a private school, just to make this even more confusing, but their second choice might be, let's say, we're pretty close to home, so the student might not be wanting to stay that close to home, but we're their real good backup. They might want to put UAlbany in their first spot so that if the private school they're thinking about doesn't participate in the Excelsior Scholarship, that the New York State aid application has a SUNY school that does. And so it creates the record, they finish the record, they then submit the Excelsior application, and they have that backup plan in place with all the appropriate applications completed, because the window for those applications may start before May 1st. They may not, because each year the Excelsior application has been opened at a different date, but just so that you have some data and some information on that aid ahead of time. So I think that's kind of what we're encouraging is, think it through, think about what aid you might be looking for, both on your first choice, but also those follow-up campuses, because not everybody does end up at their first choice.
Good point, Meryl.
Yeah, so while we're encouraging, ultimately your first choice, we're also encouraging you to consider put a SUNY first, but certainly it is not absolutely necessary. The presentation materials will be available. We are going to put them on our website and share the recording with the schools so that they can choose how to share it, so that you will have it. All of our presentation materials, actually dating back to last year, we'll start funneling out and putting the new ones up, and taking some of the old ones down, are on our additional resource page. So if you go into our website and then go to freshman information, there on the bottom left, there's a link for additional resources. We call it our financial literacy page. That page has all of our presentations throughout the year. We keep them up there and we funnel them through. Basically, most recent is on the top. And so if there's any time you'd like to see any of our presentations, they are available there, and we certainly will share the recording as well. So the FAFSA information flows to all 10 schools you list on the FAFSA. If you have more than 10, sometimes you do need to call the schools to make sure they've loaded the data before you take one off and put one on. So it's important to check with the financial aid offices to make sure that they have loaded that data, because it will depend on their student information systems when the information is available, so that they can start loading the FAFSAs into their systems. So for example, we don't get federal regulations updates to our system until December. So even if you apply October 1st, we wouldn't be able to load your FAFSA into our system until December. You have to have an admission decision before we can release a financial aid package. So we start packaging typically in January. And that may be very different for different schools. So it's a good to check with them, make sure that they have your FAFSA data, and then you can swap out that code for another code. And that school will get the data typically within a week. There's a great question. Is there a time you should stop adding schools to the FAFSA? Not until you make your final decision on May 1st. And at that point, ultimately, hopefully the school you decide on by May 1st is the school you're going to. But if something happens over the summer, there's always opportunities to make those changes later. I still have students making updates to their FAFSA or to their New York State aid application. Even now, while the 22-23 is open, the students, working within that I'm working with for 21-22 are still making adjustments. They might not have realized they needed to, or, we didn't get it. They thought we had it. And so you can actually do it all the way up until those applications close. So there's plenty of time. Any final questions for Earl or myself?
I would say certainly if you're talking to some of your fellow parents out there and we need to do this again, I will be more than happy to do that. I was a little discombobulated with my presentation with all the technology stuff, but feel free, if you want to work through the high school and they want us to do this again, I certainly am receptive to that.
And certainly we're here to answer a couple more questions if anybody has any more. And certainly we'll share this and we will be holding other financial aid nights. We will also have our SUNY Financial Aid Day. So you're more than welcome to join us for any of those events. We also have, for those who are looking at UAlbany, there are some connection days, open house type events coming up, both in person and virtual. So whichever may be your comfort level. So we encourage you to take advantage of those if UAlbany is on your college list.
And lastly, I know the counselors at both Chatham and Ichabod have my direct contact information. So if there's questions you have that can't be asked in a public forum, certainly the school counselors can link you up with me and I can get back to you. Am I thinking we're at the end?
I'm not seeing any additional questions. Thank you all for joining us. It's a lot of information to digest. Just take one step at a time through this process. Try not to stress, I guess is my point. But I know how stressful it is, meaning that I have a high school student as well. So try, if you can, to have some fun with it, especially the admission process, going out, visiting schools. Like Earl said earlier, don't knock anyone off the list until you really truly know what their bottom line is. A great question to ask is, what's your average financial aid package? Just to get a sense of the type of aid that they're offering, especially if they're not a state school, because it will vary.
Okay, I think we can end.
Have a great night, everyone. Again, we will
Night,
share the
everyone.
presentation.
Take care.